Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Erik Wetterling, also known as the Hedgeless Horseman. And we'll put a link to the Hedgeless Horseman down below this interview so you can follow along with Erik's work. And Erik, always great getting you on the KE Report to get your thoughts on what has your attention as far as the resource sector, dialing down into the gold, silver, copper, and related stocks. One of the companies we've talked about before, and we're going to talk about a couple companies in this discussion, but this one has a lot of moving parts, and it's Integra Resources. It's traded on the NYSE under the ticker ITRG and on the TSXV under the ticker ITR. Now, Integra has the operating Florida Canyon mine. They have the DeLamar development project, and they also have the Nevada North development exploration project. A lot of things going on with the company, but they did just put out their 2024 production from the Florida Canyon and really the year end and how things looked in the fourth quarter. It was actually a really strong report, so I just wanted to get your take on it since we've talked about this company before, and now we finally have some numbers to wrap around how the production's going at Florida Canyon. What's your take on Integra?
Yeah, finally the merger has been completed and we're getting a sniff of what the Florida Canyon mine could mean for Integra as a new US listed producer. And I got to be honest, like when you saw the kind of a lack of reaction when the gold price went up, even though, yes, Integra is a producer, didn't really follow it that much. So, it was kind of a laggard. And then, of course, as always, you kind of start to think it's like, it's human nature that, is there something that's not right? Is something going wrong? And then, of course, it could also be just the fact that you have a bunch of shareholders from two different companies that get mashed together, and there might be simply a lot of reshuffling or repositioning, whatever, because it was really nice to see them, as you said. They put out the production news and they hit record production. So it seems like things are going really well. And I looked at some analyst report where they expect 74,000 ounces of production for 2025 with all-in sustaining cost of $1,755 per ounce. And obviously that's a pretty solid margin, given that today's gold price is about 2,700. And also they have actually hedged or plan to hedge 50% of the production, which should, of course, maybe limit that margin a bit, but making sure that they can protect themselves on the downside. So, they have 52 million USD in cash. So they have an enterprise value of around 150 million Canadian for three assets, including Florida Canyon, which is making good money at today's gold price. And the same analyst report I mentioned earlier, they have a price to NAV ratio of 0.15 for Integra, whereas the peer group average is 0.60. So I don't know. It's like, to me, it's just remarkably cheap. It's like Rick Rule recently said that usually gold miners aren't cheap because they're always pricing in optionality, meaning gold price going higher. And then he added, except today. To be a value investor, this might be actually the one and only time almost that you can actually be a value investor, because some of these gold juniors, they're really not pricing in a higher gold price. They're not even pricing in the current gold price.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. They just put out the best production from this mine in the last 21 years, and it's almost like the market yawned about it. But look at the margins they're making at current gold prices. It's fantastic. And I've been watching this mine for a long time. I remember when Rypatch was developing it, and then they put it in production, and then Alio, and then it went over to Argonaut, and now it's in Integra's hands, which nobody even thought was going to be a producer 6 to 12 months ago, and they just had a bang-up year. So it's interesting when you look at Integra. Just one more follow-up, Erik. The DeLamar project is the flagship, and then Nevada North waiting in the wings as another big development and exploration project. When you see their production profile, what it's going to look like, let's say over the next decade, it's very impressive. Do you think it's just something where the market doesn't believe it till they're going to see it? Or do you think there's any other red flags that are holding people back? What's holding Integra back here?
That's a good question, because it's like remarkably cheap at face value. Because, of course, when Integra Resources only had DeLamar, they had a $200 million market cap when gold was at $2,000. Now one could argue that Integra is cheap just based on the Florida Canyon mine. So it's like, okay, so you're getting Nevada North and DeLamar for free at face value. It's like maybe less than free even. Okay, what could explain that? I don't really don't know, because the way I see it is like, okay, if there are potential hurdles or red flags, and I would say those have decreased if they have anything to do with permitting, because Trump just got elected. So it's like, I have no idea actually, but at least the way I see it is like, I'm not paying for Nevada North, I'm not paying for DeLamar. So even if there were some big red flags, it's like, hey, I mean, again, I'm not really paying for it. So the upside case is, of course, that imagine they do get those three assets into production. They add DeLamar and they add Nevada North over the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years or whatever. I mean, if the gold prices and the margins are anywhere close to this, I mean, that could be some absolute serious bank. And the way that Florida Canyon is performing, as far as we know, I mean, they could self-fund maybe a large part of that. So I'm quite excited for, quote, base case, which is kind of a blue sky scenario, even though they're not really, I mean, it's not like they're taking a lot of exploration risk. They have two advanced assets beyond this. So I think it's like almost the risk reward is kind of like a exploration play without the exploration risk.
Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, this company used to be valued multiples higher with just DeLamar. Now they've got Nevada North from where they merged with Millennial Precious Metals, and then they merged with Florida Canyon Gold to get the Florida Canyon Gold Mine, and they're still valued lower as a market cap than they were when they just had DeLamar. So it's a real head scratcher because there's so many positives going on with all three projects, but we'll keep following along with how things progress out of Integra Resources. Another company we've talked about on the show before, and you and I have talked about before, and full disclosure, I'm a shareholder of this company as well, is Sierra Madre. Now, Sierra Madre Gold and Silver just put out some news on January 9th that they are in full commercial production at their La Guitarra mine. They bought La Guitarra from First Majestic. For those that are not familiar with the story, they're traded on the TSXV under the ticker SM and on the OTCQX under the ticker SMDRF. What is your take on where Sierra Madre is now, finally in commercial production as a new company?
I mean, I like Sierra Madre. It's a recent addition to the HODL folio as well, because the way I see it is like, yeah, a pretty solid HODL case. And there's not too many silver juniors I actually like. But I mean, if you look at the companies, like a lot of skin in the game, they've basically overachieved when it comes to getting La Guitarra up and running. They've basically been ahead of schedule on a lot of things. So they're up to 500 tons per day, and they see a pretty, I think, probable path forward to getting that up to, 1,000 ton per day and beyond in a few years. And when you listen to the CEO speak and why they actually, jumped on these opportunities, because they're actually perhaps most excited about the exploration potential. So, I mean, if you get kind of that as a bonus, I mean, I like the production profile, especially at, today's silver price, because I expect them to make money. And if they more than double that production in a few years, and let's say silver goes up and they have this exploration potential materialize, I can see a pretty, a long, steady runway for growth, both in terms of production and exploration. And they have another project as well. So it's like, the way I see it is like, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if this position is in the HODL folio, assuming it doesn't revalue or get way overvalued. So you have to, sell maybe quicker than you expected. But yeah, come back in a couple of years, let's say. I wouldn't be surprised if this could be up a few times over. And again, I think it's just pretty simple bet in a sense, because these guys seem to very much know what they're doing. They've operated asset before, and there's a lot of skin in the game, and obviously they don't want to screw themselves over. So, I mean, a long pipeline for growth, skin in the game, and people who know what they're doing. I mean, that's basically what you would want to see in a somewhat passive HODL case.
Well, I think you summed it up well, Erik, and we just maybe wrap it up there today with these two examples of companies that have big exploration upside, big development upside, both Integra and Sierra Madre, but both relatively new producers from that standpoint and both doing well. Everything that I've watched with Sierra Madre, they have ramped up exactly like they said they would. Everything I've watched from Integra, they have ramped up exactly like they said they would. They were already in production, but just taking over the reins. And both companies having a good quarter, it looks like, and probably a good Q1 setting up as far as where metals prices are, and both mines seem to be working well. So we'll keep following along with how that organic growth feeds into the development and exploration growth of both companies. And just nice to have you on the show just to get you to weigh in on both companies since they had news out recently. If those listening in want to follow along with Erik's work, he takes deeper dives into companies like this and earlier stage companies that are explorers and developers over at the Hedgeless Horseman website. So we'll put a link to that down below. And Erik, looking forward as always to our next conversation.
The same, Chad, and thanks. Keep in mind I own shares of both companies, and Integra is a banner sponsor, so consider me biased.